Welcome from the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Livestock Systems. This training module will explain how to develop training manuals that are designed for use by trainers. This video is the third in the series on how to develop a Training of Trainers manual. In the last video, the objective was to describe the strengths of backward design and planning for training. By the end of this video, you will be able to create measurable learning objectives. Once we know the needs of our audience, the next step in developing a Training of Trainers manual is to create measurable learning objectives. A measurable learning objective means that there is a clearly measurable action that can be used to determine if the participants have mastered the subject matter. We use the term SMART as an acronym for how to develop a quality learning objective. First, a learning objective must be specific. This means that it should be very clear as to what is expected that the participant will be able to do at the end of the training. For example, an objective like understand how to vaccinate a cow is a very vague objective. A more specific objective might be state the process for vaccinating a 1-year-old cow. Next, the objective should be measurable. This requires that the objective specifies an action that can be observed. Often, people will use the terms know or understand as the action in their objective. However, how do you know if a participant knows something? How do you know if they understand? This requires the use of a directly observable behavior. A good objective will use observable actions such as state, list, demonstrate, discuss, create, perform, conduct, or evaluate. A quality learning objective will be attainable. This means that it is something that can be achieved within the context of the training. A learning objective such as the participant will be able to eradicate mastitis in the regional dairy cattle population is not attainable or achievable within the scope of a single training. A more appropriate learning objective might say, the participant will be able to develop a strategy to reduce mastitis in dairy cattle in Region X. This objective is attainable and achievable within a multi-day training event. The objective should be relevant to the needs and the context of the participants. And finally, the objective should be time-bound. This means that there should be a clearly defined time frame in which the objective will be achieved. This might be as simple as stating, by the end of this training, or by the end of this course. Let's look at this in an example. Here we have the objective. At the end of this workshop, the community animal health workers will be able to demonstrate the correct technique for vaccinating a dairy cow by needle. First, we can see that the objective is time-bound to the end of this workshop. The objective is specific in that it is targeted to the community animal health workers. It uses a clearly measurable action verb of demonstrate. To measure if the participant has learned the material, we can ask them to demonstrate the correct technique. This objective is attainable within the scope of a workshop, and it is relevant to the needs of community animal health workers who often are required to perform basic veterinary functions such as vaccinating animals. So now that we know how to write an objective, how do we decide what we should prioritize as objectives? The next few slides will provide a stepwise process for developing learning objectives. First, brainstorm all the content that should be covered within the training. In this example, we are looking at what the community animal health workers need to be able to do in order to effectively perform their jobs. So in our example, we might include conducting examinations, delivering calves, castrating animals. In some countries, community animal health workers also give vaccinations, how to use medical equipment, collecting samples, calculating losses and gains, encouraging sanitation practices, nutrition counseling, administering drugs, and so on. Once we have an exhaustive list, it becomes necessary to determine what concepts and contents should be kept, what should be deferred to another training, and what should be eliminated altogether. This can be done by categorizing the brainstormed concepts into those that the participant must know, what it would be nice for them to know if there is time, and what they do not need to know right now. Let's say this is going to be a one-day workshop. Perhaps what the participants must know in this workshop is how to conduct examinations of various livestock animals. In some countries, they must know how to vaccinate animals and administer drugs, and they must know how to identify basic livestock diseases. It would be nice, if there is time, for them to learn how to deliver calves and provide nutrition counseling. And perhaps the other items can be postponed to another training. Once we have decided what the participants must know, and perhaps what it would be nice for them to know, we can put those items into a logical order. In this example, we want to show prevention versus treatment. So we start with the vaccinations, then we move to the basics of conducting examinations of livestock, then to disease surveillance and reporting, and finally to administering of drugs. Once we have the content in a logical order, we make it participant-centered. In this case, the training is centered on the community animal health worker. This may seem like a minor step, but this ensures that the training is focused on what the participant will be able to do at the end of training, rather than focusing on what the instructor will be doing. Next, we add a measurable action and rewrite the objective into a logical sentence. For example, Objective 2.2 is already measurable as the community animal health worker will be able to identify diseases. As the trainer, I can evaluate my participants by asking them to look at images of the symptoms of various diseases to identify what the diseases are. And finally, we make sure it is specific, perhaps by adding necessary detail. For example, in the last slide, Objective 2.2 was, the community animal health worker will be able to identify diseases. Now we make it more specific, attainable, and time-bound. For example, by the end of this workshop, the community animal health worker will be able to identify common diseases in dairy cattle, including mastitis, parasites, and bovine respiratory disease complex. Finally, we check to be sure that it is SMART. The objective states, by the end of this workshop, the community animal health worker will be able to demonstrate the correct technique for administering a vaccine to a dairy cow by needle. We can see it is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Now we have a measurable learning objective. Now for a brief review. What are SMART learning objectives? Are they A, standardized, measurable, attainable, relevant, and tangible? B, are they specific, motivating, attainable, responsive, and time-sensitive? C, are they static, measurable, attainable, reactive, and time-bound? Or D, are they specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound? The correct answer is D. SMART learning objectives are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. Which of the following objectives is SMART? A, learn how to identify the symptoms of mastitis. B, the instructor is going to teach about the symptoms of mastitis. C, at the end of this training, the participants will be able to understand the symptoms of mastitis in dairy cattle. Or D, at the end of this training, the community animal health worker will be able to identify the symptoms of mastitis in dairy cattle. The correct answer is D. At the end of this training, the community animal health worker will be able to identify the symptoms of mastitis in dairy cattle. Please continue to the next video in the series, Aligning Evaluations with Objectives.